The Daily Faceoff came out with their top 10 New York Rangers prospects in the system right now. So in today's video, we're going to take a look and kind of break down this top 10 New York Rangers prospects ranking and just kind of take a look at which prospects may be too high, too low, and also just talk about each of these prospects individually as well. So let's just get right into things here, and we'll start off with the number 10 spot where they have Adam Sakura, which I think is a pretty fair spot to have him in. He is a pretty good prospect. He's a former second-round pick back at the 2022 NHL draft, a later second-round pick, and he's someone who I think isn't some elite kind of high-end prospect, but I think he does have a really high floor, and I think worst case is going to be a good bottom six forward at the NHL level for years and years to come. He doesn't have any kind of area in his game that necessarily kind of stands out in a crazy way, but I just think he is a really good kind of all-around player. There's not one area in his game that's necessarily awful, but there's not also kind of one area that's absolutely incredible, right? He's just an all-around kind of good player. He's really solid defensively, can help kill penalties. He's solid offensively, not quite a power play guy probably at the NHL level, but I think can be maybe like a 35-point kind of player, possibly something around there. More of a kind of third-line guy at best at the NHL level, but has a good two-way game there, really solid defensively, kind of a Swiss Army knife type player there, can kill penalties, be good defensively, bring some stuff offensively, bring some energy, play with a bit of physicality, some toughness, some bite there. I mean, I remember back at his kind of World Junior days with Team Slovakia, he got suspended there for a bit, so he is a guy who definitely has a bit of an edge to his game there, and with all that being said, and him having that pretty well kind of refined all-around game, I think at worst case, he's going to be a kind of decent fourth liner. Best case, he's going to be a really good kind of third line winger to have that can possibly kind of here and there maybe jump up into the top six. But for the most part there, I think could end up being a really great kind of third line winger for years and years to come. And with his kind of all-around skill set and him being, maybe close to NHL ready, we definitely could see him at some point potentially this upcoming season or possibly the following season after that. Next up here, though, we have Drew Forde at the number 9 spot, and maybe you could argue he should be a couple spots higher up there, but I don't think this is too bad of a spot for him to be at. He is a former third-round pick of the Rangers from the 2023 NHL draft. Of course, spent last season there with his, New York Rangers kind of prospect teammate there, if you want to say that, in Gabe Perreault there. They spent time with the National Development Program together and also, of course, played together at Boston College. Drew kind of took a pretty massive step the past couple seasons here since being drafted by the Rangers. He's kind of turned into a bit of a steal potentially, so this is a pretty kind of highly rated prospect in my opinion. Not super highly rated, but for the Rangers system overall, on the defensive side of things, he is kind of one of the kind of higher tier echelon kind of defense prospects. I think he has the potential to be maybe a pretty solid kind of second pairing defenseman, more of a shutdown kind of player, defensive defenseman. They're not the biggest player in the world, but has a bit of physicality, solid puck mover, and just an all-around kind of good defensive game. Not going to bring a ton offensively, but I do think he is a pretty solid kind of passer there, pretty good at breaking the puck out. So I think on that side of things, he's, not bad, a pretty solid puck mover and good defensively, but offensively, you're not going to get a ton from him. But he's definitely, a pretty solid prospect there. Around this spot is kind of fair, I guess. But like I said, if you wanted to throw him up on another spot or two, to like 7 or 8, I could understand that. But being at number 9 here does make sense for a pretty solid kind of more defensive prospect in Drew Forde. Next up here, though, we have at number 8, Dylan Garand. And this is an interesting one. It's kind of tough to really kind of, I would say, kind of place him in a ranking here because, Dylan is someone who's 23 years old, has been doing pretty good at the AHL level there, but of course he is a goaltender, so it can be a little tough to kind of really gauge things with them because, goalies sometimes take a lot longer, so I think around this spot is kind of fair, though. He is a good prospect still. I don't think he's ever going to be a kind of like upper tier kind of starter, but maybe he ends up becoming on the high end of things a, kind of decent kind of tandem goalie there. Can be a part of a kind of duo. Worst case, he probably ends up being maybe a kind of solid backup at the NHL level, possibly. We'll have to wait and see, but I do think potentially once Jonathan Quick does end up leaving, assuming he doesn't sign another kind of one-year deal with the team to, be the backup for 2026-27, I do think eventually we could see Dylan Garand be the backup to Igor, and maybe eventually he gets kind of dealt on to another team there to be a kind of tandem guy or a starter possibly, but for right now, I think this is a pretty fair spot to have him at. He's a solid goalie, obviously kind of smaller compared to a lot of kind of other goalies around the league, kind of the average, but I think is still a pretty solid goalie and can maybe be a good backup at the NHL level, possibly one day. And now for the number 7 spot. This is where I'm going to also talk about, of course, a player that they have at the number 7 spot, but I'm also going to mention the player that I am kind of shocked a little bit that they don't have in their actual top 10, and that is prospect Noah Laba. This is someone who I definitely think should be in the top 10, and personally, I would have Noah Laba as the top center prospect in the Rangers system. So like I said, I am a little shocked that they didn't have Laba in here at all in the top 10. But taking a look at the actual list here, at number 7, they do have another center prospect, and this one is Carey Terrence, who was, of course, picked up in that Chris Kreider trade where the Rangers got back a third-round pick in the 2025 draft, and Carey Terrence, the prospect, for Kreider and a fourth-round pick. So the Rangers moved up around in the draft, basically, and got back a prospect for Kreider, which wasn't a bad trade at all, I thought. And for Carey Terrence, I would probably have him a little lower on this list just because I don't think the upside is quite there. I think the kind of floor is there for someone like this. Same thing with Adam Sakura, like player where I don't think the ceiling is the highest, but the floor is pretty high there. I think at worst, he's probably going to be a pretty solid kind of bottom 6 forward. I just don't think the ceiling is quite there to be like a top 6 prospect. So that's why I wouldn't have a guy like this so high. But he is known as being a really great skater, good defensive game, solid offensively, but brings a lot of toughness, physicality, good at battling in the corners and stuff like that. So he does have that kind of edge to his game that brings some energy. So that's nice and all. But to me, that's more of a kind of bottom 6 forward, which I definitely think he kind of projects more to be. So that's why I would definitely have a prospect like Noah Laba, who I think has the potential to maybe be a kind of second-line caliber centerman, whereas a guy like Carey probably tops out as a third-line guy at best. So I would kind of swap these players here, and I would probably have Carey maybe just on the outside looking in or around that kind of 9-10 range. But personally, I would definitely have someone like Laba over a guy like Carey Terrence. Next up here, though, for prospect number 6, we have Brett Berard, and I think this is a kind of decent spot there, of course. I don't think the upside is through the roof, but we have seen him at the NHL level. He's played pretty good. We know what he brings there. He's a bit of an undersized guy, but brings a lot of energy, some toughness, especially for his size, and I think he's got a good offensive game there. Not bad defensively. Like, he's not a kind of liability like some other kind of smaller, undersized kind of rookies and young players kind of can be at the NHL level, so I think he's not bad defensively. Not great, obviously, but not terrible. Has a pretty solid kind of game. So I like him a lot. I think he's a solid prospect and is fitting to be around this kind of number 6 spot. Next up here at number 5, they have EJ Emery, who is a right-handed defense prospect. He's 19 years old, playing for the University of North Dakota this past season, where he didn't put up a ton of numbers offensively, so a lot of people kind of got a little worried, but he is known as being a defensive defenseman who is a shutdown kind of player. He's got some great size there, great physicality, really tough player, but also is known as being an elite athlete and a phenomenal skater. So he's got some of those intangibles that you can't quite teach, right? You can't really kind of teach that toughness and kind of physicality, right? Players just kind of have to want to do that, and he has some of that in his game there. He's got that size that you can't teach. He's got some good defensive instincts, and also, you can obviously teach skating, but to this level that he's at with his size there, it's pretty unique. You don't see many guys like that, so I think having a guy like that, he's got some pretty good upside there. Whether or not he's going to be a top pairing kind of guy at the initial level, we'll have to wait and see. He's still a very raw prospect, but I think him being at the number 5 spot makes a lot of sense there because he is a prospect with a pretty high ceiling, although it may have a pretty kind of low floor because, we really don't know what we have with this guy as he is still a very, very raw and young prospect. Next up here in the number 4 spot, we have Brennan Othmann, which makes sense. He's a pretty solid prospect. I think maybe he doesn't quite have the upside of being a kind of elite winger, but I think can definitely potentially be a, pretty good, maybe second line or at least kind of middle 6 winger for years to come. He plays with some good energy, good physicality level, obviously not a bad defensive winger at all. So I think all around has a pretty good game there. And with that physicality and energy, he definitely will have a spot at the NHL level, I'm sure. Whether or not that's in a kind of second line role, a third line role, a fourth line role, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think he has a pretty good kind of level of potential there, but I don't quite think has the upside of being a top line level guy, like a truly kind of elite level forward. So we'll have to wait and see kind of what he develops into, but definitely is a pretty solid prospect. And next up here, we've got at number 3, Malcolm Spence. And this is a prospect that I think does have a pretty high ceiling. I think he's definitely got the potential to be a true top 6 caliber forward. He's got a really good kind of all-around game. He's reliable defensively for a winger. He's great offensively, has pretty high potential there, but also I think is someone who brings a lot of toughness, physicality, and energy to the lineup as well. This is someone who has that kind of playoffs type kind of style to his game there, just like a Brennan Hoffman and a Brett Berard. He brings some of that toughness, physicality, energy, which I'd love to see, especially out of a player who has that kind of, offensive punch to his game as well, and is also, reliable defensively. So I think he's got a really great all-around game there, and the kind of question right now is, I think, how kind of high is that ceiling offensively is really going to kind of gauge what kind of a player he can be possibly at the NHL level. It seems like he's going to have that physicality and kind of defensive play to get that done at the NHL level there. He's got that energy, like I said. So worst case, I think he's going to be in that bottom six. Probably he's got that kind of play style as well, but he could potentially be one of those kind of Will Cooley, JT Miller type guys who were in that top six. They're playing, like top six caliber forwards, but also can bring that toughness and physicality and energy, which I think would be such a big bonus. So we'll have to wait and see kind of how that offense kind of develops there. And he's going to go play at the University of Michigan as well this upcoming season. So going to play for a pretty great program at the college level. So hopefully he can have a pretty big season there, breakout, and possibly maybe end up being on the NHL team at some point for next season, potentially in 26, 27, or possibly beyond that. We'll have to wait and see. Still a pretty raw prospect, of course, but definitely a pretty highly rated one at that as well. And now for the number 2 spot, we have Scott Morrow, who of course was picked up in the Keandre Miller trade, where the Rangers signed and traded Keandre over to the Carolina Hurricanes for a first and second round pick in 2026, as well as prospect Scott Morrow. He's known as being a pretty highly rated prospect and has been for quite a few years now, while being, of course, with the Carolina Hurricanes previously. He was talked about lots, being part of kind of trade packages for star-level players. So he's a pretty highly valuable kind of prospect there. Was one of the top prospects in the Kane system and has been for years now. 6'2", right-handed defenseman. More of an offensive kind of guy than a defensive defenseman, but I do think has a solid kind of two-way game. Not phenomenal defensively, definitely better offensively than defensively, but not a liability by any means. So I think with some time as he develops along there, should become hopefully a top 4 caliber kind of two-way defenseman there, or at least more of an offensive kind of guy with an all-right defensive game. So I think it's a pretty solid player to pick up there, of course, in that Keandre Miller trade. I think, that first and second round pick alone would have been enough value to kind of satisfy my liking for that trade there with Keandre, but getting back on top of that first and second, a guy like Scott Morrow, a pretty highly rated NHL-ready prospect who stands at 6'2", I think that's pretty incredible. So I don't mind him being at this number 2 spot. And then, of course, you've got in the number 1 spot, no surprise at all, Gabe Perreault. Not going to talk too long about him because we know what he can bring there, and that is an elite offensive game. He's that Panarin-type potential player. That's the kind of skill set and type of player you could potentially see with someone like a Gabe Perreault. He's not going to be a plus defensively. He's going to be more than likely a bit of a liability, but at the end of the day, he's going to be potentially an absolutely incredible offensive threat out there, being a dynamic playmaker, incredible power play threat there, and of course can just be an amazing distributor, but also has the kind of just smarts and decent enough shot there to be a good goal scorer as well, I'm sure. So I think in general, he has the capability of being a true kind of 100-plus point player like a Panarin, but it's all about whether or not he can actually put it all together at the NHL level. Anyways, though, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post every single day a video about the New York Rangers. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on this top 10 prospect rankings here by Daily Faceoff. Comment down below your thoughts on these prospects and on which players you would kind of swap around there, which players you think were left out, like a Noah Laba, for example, I think was left off. That definitely should have been on there. So let me know your thoughts on these prospects and this rankings as a whole. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.